Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, tonight we're going to be continuing with our series of Shirim entering the Sea of Wisdom based on the weekly Torah of the Goyen and the Tzaddik Rav Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern Shlita. And this week we're actually going to be focusing on the Shalosh Shidduch Drasha that the Rebbe gave last week in Eretz Yisrael in Parsha Shlach, which worked for us in Chutz La'aretz this week on this Shabbos. And I'm not sure if I remember this happening or whether I was paying attention or not. But what they've been doing, what the Chevra have been doing, what Rebbe Kiva Shlita has been doing with the Rebbe's Shalosh Shidduch Drashos is typically the Rebbe gives the drasha, Rebbe Kiva writes the entire thing down in a miraculous way. Then it takes a year or so for that drasha, that mimer, to come out with footnotes. But either because the parshios are not aligned, or there's a disjointed relationship between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz right now, what Rebbe Kiva has been doing and what the Machon has been doing is that we're getting the previous week's Shalosh Shidduch Drasha from the Parsha in Eretz Yisrael for the week where the Parsha is being read in Chutz La'aretz. And so it's mamish in real time, where you're able to learn the Torah that the Rebbe, the Tzaddik, gave over on this year's Parsha Shlach in real time on Parsha Shlach, which is typically an impossibility. So it's mamish, it's almost like living the Torah in real time. And this mimer in Parsha Shlach, as well as the previous mimer of 2 weeks ago in Parshas Ba'aloischa, are ma'amarim that, in my humble opinion, the Rebbe is building up a certain mahalach in the Inyan in bitachon, in an Inyan in bittul ha'atzmi, that personally it's not a raya, but that I haven't seen this mahalach being built before, and it's mamish that the Torah itself is so powerful and so beautiful that this is the nakuda that I wanted to point to. You know, I do highly recommend for those who have gotten it, I'm happy to share it also, but the Shalosh Shidduch Drasha from Parshas Ba'aloischa, where the Rebbe talks about the concept of Nehemah de Kisufa, that a person is born into this world, and we know from the Ramchal, Schusi Hagan Aleinu, and from the Tzaddikim, that the reason, the ultimate purpose for Bechira, for volitional choice between good and bad, is so that an individual should not be ashamed to receive a gift that they did not earn, and to be stuck in busha, in a bread of shame, in a Nehemah de Kisufa, because a person wants to work for things through their own labor, and they want their own labor to create the product of their labor and to partake of that which they engaged in their own. But what the Rebbe hints to, based on the writings of the Ramchal, is that there's a darga above that. There's a darga where a person can be makabel everything without any effort, because what we come to realize is that even at the end of the day, after all is said and done, we put in every ounce of effort, we're still undeserving of anything, and everything is still just a matnas chinam. And when a person rests themselves not on koich v'yatzim yadi, but we recognize that koich v'yatzim yadi, even at the fullest extent, is still not enough to be deserving of anything. At that point, the person leans in to receiving a Nehemah de Kisuf, and a person is no longer bebusha. It's the aspect of bicha batchu v'loy boshu, that through bitachon ha'amiti, where I simply rely kol kulo on the rachamim rabbim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at that point, I no longer have to be stuck within this need to earn my keep, because I realize that I don't earn anything at all, even after all of my earning is done. And in this week's Parsha, in Parsha Shlach, we see a continuity of the idea of bitachon as it manifests in that high darga of the bittul ha'atzmi. And we'll let the Rebbe's words speak for themselves. This is towards the ends of the drasha in Parsha Shlach. On Daf Yud Tes, the Rebbe says as follows: a person needs to enter into the place within their minds where it's efes zulaso, there is quite literally nothing other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu ve'ein oid, and there's nothing in existence other than the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvaydu v'atzma, the highest level of bittul, the bittul of the Shem Havaya ha'atzmi, that Hashem karachim l'chan, and Hashem koidem hachet, and Hashem acher hachet. What the Rebbe is masbir is that these two Shem Havayos are the two different expressions of the Kabbalah of the Talmidim of the Arizal. The second Shem Havaya, which we have a correspondence to, which is Shaykh to our reality, represents the worlds that Rav Chaim Vital Schusi Hagan Aleinu taught to us. Adam Kadmon Atzilas Bri Yitzira Nasiya, and the Shem Havaya aligns with that. But the Havaya Koidim Hachet, the first Havaya, is the Oilamos of Oilam HaMalbush, of Mahari Sarug, of the Kabbalah of the Italian students of the Arizal, which brings us into a place of Malchus Ein Sof. It brings us into that place of complete and utter bittul ha'atzmi, that Shem Havaya ha'atzmi. Ulizchos l'tmunas Hashem yabit, to be zeichet to the ability to behold the Tmuna Hashem Yabit, which the Rebbe is masbir over and over and over, is not chas v'shalom a Tmuna. There is no Tmuna, but it's the notion of a Tmuna within the negation of a Tmuna. It's the Shem Havaya, so to speak, that the Shlach HaKadosh speaks about, which is Shem Havaya B'li Oisios. It's the capacity to hold on to dargan and to gradations, even though we know that there is absolutely no gradation whatsoever. What the Rebbe uses very often to describe this space, following a linguistic turn in the writings of the Rebbe Rashab, but kind of the Makab Patish is through the Rebbe himself, is a Metzias She'ena b'Metzias, a non-existent existent. It's there, but it's not there. It's the Shem Havaya Ha'atzmi, where nothing exists, yet the self continues to exist in some non-existent type of way. Lirei Shehakoyla Lukus, to see that everything is godliness, the Ein Shum Metzias Rak Efes Ulaso, and that existence is nothing other than nothing but him. V'hu al yedei, and how does a person reach this level? Hu al yedei shemisyachten kol haprate pratia shel haTorah hakadoisha liros ech kol prat hu havaya ha'atzmi ki kol ois v'ois shebeTorah hu shem. Now, this is what the Rebbe was talking about in this Maimer and Parsha Shlach, is the need to descend down into the Prate Pratias of Eretz Yisrael, into the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, into the Gufaniyut Torah, into the engagement with the particulars of the particulars and the particulars of the particulars of the particulars, to descend down into Torah Sanigla, into every chelik and shas, every halacha, every sugya and shas, and not to see that as a stira, God forbid, to the unity of all things, to the klal hagadol of Pnimius HaTorah, or of living with Hashgachas Hashem in the Dor HaMidbar, but rather to see each and every particular iteration of the Torah, in spite of the fact that it appears to be in opposition to the generalized wholeness of the Yichud, to see each and every prat as an opportunity to reveal the Yichud Ha'amiti in a new way, a new vessel to reveal the ayin, a new chelik of ani, a new sense of the self, which is there simply to propel a further expression of the ayin, so that the prate pratius and the klal hagadol are not in contradistinction to one another. The ani and the ayin, the self and nothingness, are not in contradistinction to one another. The Torah Sanigla and the Torah Sanista are not in contradiction to one another, but rather Torah Sanigla, the pratius, the anoichius, the selfhood, the separation, the dargin, the prate pratim are there to propel and reveal in a more intensified, manifested way the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because in truth, every letter of the Torah is a name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu itself, because the prat contains everything within itself. Everything is everything. So even the smallest manifestation of the prate pratius of halacha contain within themselves the klal gadol of everything that Pnimius HaTorah is coming to teach us. And the Rebbe continues with the klal gadol from the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, v'tafas b'mikzas tafas b'kula. And a person who is touching a part of holiness is in truth touching the entirety of holiness. Like the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says, that a typhus chelik min ha'etzem typhus it's ha'etzem kulo, that one who touches a part of the entirety is in truth grasping the entirety in and of itself. And as the Rebbe Rashab asks, what shaychus is there to a chelik within atzmus? How can there be a chelik min ha'etzem? But Zak the Rebbe Rashab, and this is what the Rebbe seems to be following, is that at the highest darga of the Shem Havaya Ha'atzmi, there's no distinction between the Prate Pratius and the Klal Hagadol. Each and every prat reveals the Klal Hagadol to the extent that the particularizations of the particulars and all of the descent into the mundanity and the stuckness, all of it is explicitly announcing the ultimate and unbridled unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And everything in its entirety is contained within the concept, and you today are connected, are cleaving, are davuk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your God, Chaim Kulchem Hayom, and through that connectivity you draw down life, you draw down Chayes, Ki Koyel HaOisiyos Hem B'Seid Aleph, because in truth all of the Oisiyos of the Torah, all of the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything in the world is just an Aleph, which represents the Alufa Shel Olam. Aleph is the Osios of Pella. It means the wonderment, Shemafli La'asos, that connects above and below in an impossible unified way, like the Balatani describes in the 20th letter of Igros Kodesh, that it's a Raza de Mehem Nusa, it's the secret of faith. It's also explained in Shar Yichud Ve'Amuna, that how is this Aleph everywhere, even though everything seems to be the opposite of the Aleph? That's the Pella Elyon, that's the secret of the Alufa Shel Olam. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov teaches us, that in truth the Aleph Beis is not Aleph Beis Gimel Dalid, rather it's Aleph, and then 2 aleph, and then 3 aleph, and 4 aleph, and 5 aleph, to the point that the alephs congeal upon themselves to begin to appear as separate letters. But in truth, when I invest myself deeply into it and I disrobe what is underneath, I uncover the alufa shel olam. And this is the way that we overcome Armelis Harasha, which the Rebbe quoted earlier from the Abir Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Abu Chatzera, that describes how Armelis Harasha was the klipa that was covering over Eretz Yisrael, which corresponds to the klipa of Esav and Yishmael, Keneged Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And our avodah is to overcome Armelis Harasha by recognizing the aleph that's hidden in everything. Because what Armelis Harasha does is it makes us feel low and weakened in the sense that we can never fulfill that which we need to fulfill. Because in truth, when each and every person looks at themselves, or the reality of each and person's self is that we're very distant from the tachlis, we're very distant from the main goal, as Rabbi Nachman points out over and over. But in truth, the rectification to this, the uncovering of the aleph, is sheyesh sod hatshuva, that there's a secret of tshuva, the ability to return, the ability to move from the taf to the aleph, the ability to move from the prate pratim into the klal, from distinction into clarity, and not only to deny the distinction, but to drag the distinction into clarity, to reveal the clarity in an even more intense way, because now it's not only clarity where clarity can be found, but rather clarity is found also within the opposite of clarity. And this is the secret of tshuva, that tshuva is not shaykh only to the Balei Tshuva, but in truth, as the Zohar Kadosh says, and the Mittler Rebbe has a beautiful, beautiful kuntras on this, that Mashiach asya la'afsa tzadikaya b'tiyufta, that Mashiach comes in order to help the tzadikim return in tshuva, to teach the tzadikim how to be zeicha to the dargah ha'elyona of tshuva, and that Rabbi Nachman describes in Torah Vav of tshuva on the tshuva, that this tshuva is shayach afilu b'tzadikim achi gedolim. Even the greatest tzadikim need to be oisek in tshuva. But afilu b'Moshe Rabbeinu, even in Moshe Rabbeinu, because again, like we've said, the klal hagadol is that no human being is perfect, even Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's the ikar tachlis of the tzadikim, to teach us that everybody is shayach to tshuva. V'ayidei tshuva nechnasim l'tainu ka'atzmi leitzachayim, and through tshuva, through moving from the distortion into clarity, from dragging the separation into unity, we move back into that place of essential and simple tainu ka'atzmi, the inherent pleasure that exists within the very core of each and every individual, in spite of the fact that we might not be aware of it or feel it. It's the pleasure of the self and its selfhood, leitzachayim, to the tree of knowledge, which the Rebbe quoted in Parshas Ba'aloischa based on the Ramchal and Adir Bamarom, that even though we ate from the Eitz Hadas Toivara, we still have the ability to partake of the Eitz HaChaim. If we're mispoinin enough, we can enter into the Gan Eden of our lives. And we elevate nukva, we elevate the malchus, we elevate the prate pratim, we elevate the shas, we elevate niglos hatayra, we elevate the prate pratius of Eretz Yisrael, which is the presence of the Shechina, the secret of the Shechina, and we elevate it back up into unity. Veheim Amru, what did the Meraglim say when they confronted the possibility of engaging with the Prate Pratius and engaging with the Shechina and engaging with Torah Sanigla and engaging with the Torah of Eretz Yisrael? Heim Amru, Moshe Rabbeinu in Yochel Yichanes L'Eretz Yisrael. They said, you're not going to be able to enter into Eretz Yisrael because they were so overwhelmed. How could it be that we can elevate the fruits of the land which represent the particularities of the particularities, the parts of the Shechina HaKadosh, the Prate Pratius of existence, the engagement with physicality? As Rashi points out, that the Meraglim felt that the burden is too heavy for us to bear. We can't bear this burden. We can't carry this burden. And on this it says, and the notion of the Meraglim was that in truth, the chavush, he who is stuck within the jail cell, cannot free himself from the jail cell. Upirish Hagra in his Pirish on Agadita, the Koyal Shechina HaKadosh Kavyachal, Shio Lechas Yimana Begolas, K'may B'chol Tzarasim Leitzar. And what the Meraglim were pointing out is that how can we enter into the Prate Pratius? How can we free the Shechina? How can the Shechina free itself? How can all of the distortion reveal itself to be part and parcel of the Klal Gadol, of that inherent unity that reveals the ayin in an even deeper way? This was their fear. But in truth, it's only through tshuva which gives us access to the Shar Chamishim, to the Nun Shari Bina, which is this kashrus to Chachma and Keser. That gives us the ability to elevate ourselves out of Golus, the secret of tshuva. And this and this is what it says: Hakasav v'ulam chayani v'yamalich v'ed Hashem es kol haaretz, and the promise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes that as long as I shall live on a certain level, that my honor is going to fill the aretz. Because in truth, a person can ascend up to that essential pleasure and godliness, and a person can merit the tainuk ha'atzmi be'elikus, the ability to feel the deepest pleasure imaginable in the inner interiority, in the silence of the self. And this is through the desire of the heart. We know the Zohar HaKadosh tells us that that no mind, no intellect can contemplate it whatsoever, but that doesn't mean that the desire of the heart doesn't have access to it. Like the Arizal that the Arizal taught us that it wasn't through Ruach HaKodesh that he was zocha to everything he was zocha to. It was through the simcha belibo. It was the nekuda of simcha, shusharish kol Torah kula, which is that nekuda hapnimius of the rusa deliba, the secret of tshuva, which brings us back and elevates all of the prate pratim back into the klal gadol. Ukamaykin ha Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, and so too with the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, sha'amar b'she'ifa achas beloto shelo, that with one pull on his pipe, one pull on his tobacco pipe, poyel yoyter mimasha al todes asa kol yom. The Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh was able to say that from one pull of my pipe, I'm able to perform and succeed in more than what the Tolas Yaakov Yosef, what his Talmud Mufak, or one of his Talmudim Mufakim, was capable of encountering in his whole life, to teach us that through the Rusa Deliba, through the Hisoirus of Tshuva, the Tzadikim Amitim, there's the capacity to be Mamtik as HaKoil. And everything is only through the Simcha Atzuma Be'elikus, the pure and unadulterated Simcha in the singular point of Elokus, which is present in our lives in that moment, in the secret of Havaya Ha'atzmi, in the secret of the essential name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the way on a certain level to ascend out of the particularities and out of the thicket that we find ourselves stuck in, and all of the confusion and the confines that we find ourselves stuck in when encountering the Prate Pratius of Eretz Yisrael, when encountering the Prate Pratius of difficulty of being human, of Torah Sanigla, what a person needs to uncover at that point is the Ru'usa Deliba, that unadulterated nekuda hapnimius of the Ru'usa Deliba, that tshuva that is mala all the prate pratim back up to the klal gadol, to be megala the tesefes kisha, to take all of the oisios from taf to shin to reish to kuf to tzadi to pei to ayin v'chule, and to be megala the alufa shel olam that's hidden in all of it. And that's through the nekuda of simcha pnimius. That's through the one act that a person does, the one pull of the pipe of the Baal Shem Tov, that we have to believe that any moment has the ability to be mamtik everything in the world, to be mamtik zayin alts. Like the tzaddik said after returning from Uman on a Rosh Hashanah, before speaking about the inyan of Uman in Yerushalayim, what I was zeicha to hear from a close Talmud is that what the Rebbe said, he was pacing back and forth over and over, and what he said over and over is, Ich kenen mamtik zayin alts. I have the ability to fix everything. Everything can be fixed. So the koyach of the tshuva, of the tzaddik, of the megala, the alufa shel olam, the pele elyon, be'ezras Hashem.